Mary, thank you. Hello, it's good to see you,
It's good to see you as well.
kind of virtually. Let's start at the very beginning. Where and when were you born?
I was born September 27th, 1948 in Indianapolis, Indiana, in a Catholic unwed mother's home.
And,
You asked for my signs too, so I have a Libra sun sign, Cancer moon, and a Virgo rising.
hmm. So I think of Libra people, I think of justice, fairness, sometimes can't make up their minds. Does any of that fit you?
I'm sure that most of the people in my life would find at least one of those, yeah. I'm not so, I don't struggle so much with making up my mind. Maybe I used to. I don't know. Maybe as an elder, I'm more clear about that.
Hmm. What was that like to be in the family with a unwed Catholic teenage mother?
Well, since I was just a baby, I was really living at first with my mother. She took me to her older brother's house nearby, and there were, see, three siblings there, young children, cousins, and then their parents, which was her oldest brother, John. So we were there for a little bit, and I'm not even sure how long she stayed, and then we moved up to her parents' home in northwestern Indiana near Lake Michigan. And there, my grandmother, her mother, Grandma Hannah, really took over as my first mother, which was not a good thing in the long run. She made my mother feel that she wasn't good enough to be a mother, as it turned out. I found out later on. And my aunt, the elder sister, was second mother. So those two were always picking me up and taking care of me and with buying little outfits or whatever they did. But they wouldn't let her near me, and that was probably one of the biggest mistakes. I loved them both. I loved them all, but three mothers was a challenge.
Yes. And that really has been a theme that comes out in your book, Naked Seeds, Naked Seeds. One woman unearths what was silenced, that there's a lot of being silenced, denied your point of view, grief. Um,
Yes.
what 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 have you learned from all that?
Well, I think it was a gift in the long run because when I realized that I could help others who may have had similar experiences, I guess I'd had enough of my own therapy with different therapists and other ways of looking at life, looking at faith, and so on, that especially the recovery movement and learning about that in Minnesota when I lived there, I started to understand what was behind all of the interplay in families. And then also with some teaching about how to do hands-on healing and just be present to people in a healing environment, it helped me to help them. And with each story they shared, I could see the similarities, not in a broad sense, but I could make a safe space for them to explore that. Not because I was totally healed of it, but because I understood it, because I was comfortable with it, because I knew there were ways to get better, to do some healing around it.
What is the recovery movement?
Well, I guess I use that as a broad category for the Alcoholics Anonymous and other groups that were founded. I wrote some, uh, I should say, I contacted publishers who published in a paper there in St. Paul, Minnesota, that was specifically for the recovery community, and it was called The Phoenix. And so again, I was learning a lot from those stories, from the papers, from the publishers, which gave me a broad range of how to listen to people in their process of healing.
But you yourself didn't have any pattern of addiction.
Well, I suppose my side of it was uh, what's the word? I can't even remember the word because I haven't used it in so long, but a codependency. I had to learn about codependency. I didn't have an addiction per se, but the codependency part was very much a part of my attempt to have relationships and, just, and even in work situations, gradually I learned how to modify that, be healthier with it.
Can you give us an example of a situation where you realize, oh, I'm being codependent, and how you change that pattern?
Wow, I haven't thought of that in a while, but I suppose I think of a few relationships where I felt like I had to change myself to continue to be loved by the other person. I can think of that with a man that I knew, and mostly with a couple of women that I tried to have, primary relationships with. I was always trying to please them, kind of like my mother used to do. Only I didn't get that at first. And I thought if I just did those things, then this person would stay with me or like me. But I wasn't being fully aware that I just needed to be myself, so there was clarity about, whether this person wanted me as opposed to something I was redefining or trying to redesign to fit into that. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. It's
Yeah.
kind of like what people on the spectrum talk about masking.
Mm,
You act out how you think you're supposed to behave according to
sure.
what you see around you. And then you mentioned you had training in healing techniques. What specifically?
Oh, it's a long time ago. There was a woman who taught, trying to think of the name of it because it was a little bit different. That one may come to me, but when I was in Minnesota, the College of St. Mary's College, which is associated with the St. Catherine University, was in Minneapolis, and they were. It was the time when, excuse me, 35% or so of people's health dollars were going into alternative medicine. And so there was a real awareness of we need to have teach some people about this and so I was going to classes I was asked to go to classes in holistic health techniques and in some kind of therapy also that related to holistic health. There were two titles that I can't remember at the moment. It was 1980, I think. And I was one of the people, many in the community who were already doing massage work or healing work. So in that college situation, we were trained in Feldenkrais techniques and a variety of different modalities of hands-on healing, but also Chinese medicine. We learned more about that. We didn't become acupuncturists, but we knew how to use the acupressure point. So a variety of things, including counseling, so knowing how to counsel someone so that to learn to be open to the new techniques and go home and use them on themselves. So it was a 2-year program, and I felt really, proud and glad to be a part of that, to contribute. So that was good training. And the rest of it really mostly was, besides learning some shamanic training later on my own self, and then knowing how to help people sort of stretch to those other places that they might go for healing, whether that was shamanic or just sort of mentally or psychologically traveling to another place for information or healing. Um, that was important. That was an important part for me as well. So it was kind of on the job training after that in some ways as well. Yeah.
Could you tell us how Feldenkrais works? It's hands-on?
It's been a long time since I was trained in that. I can't define it other than I can remember some amazing examples of the teacher telling us there was a woman who was a pianist and she suddenly couldn't play, her hands, arthritis or something. And so she taught this tapping technique. So you could put your hand on a surface and then tap, 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 tap. You start with one, one, two, 1, 2, 3. On each finger, you go up to 5. And it sounds simple, but it turned out by doing that, repeating that with each hand, she was able to begin to play again. So that's one I've used with a number of people who use their hands for a variety of reasons. But I couldn't tell you the actual core definition of Feldenkrais. It was Moshe Feldenkrais who founded it, a physician. So I
Does
would
the
encourage
person
people.
tap on themselves or does the practitioner do the tapping?
We did both. It could be either.
Hmm.
You could do it on your desk. You could do it on your own hand. And it wasn't just your hands. You could, of course, apply to other parts of the body, like tap your foot if there was something going on in the lower part of the body. It was fascinating. And there was another one that starts with a T. Sorry, I didn't do some research on this. There's
There's
another technique.
therapeutic touch that nurses do.
Therapeutic touch. Yes, I learned that. And that was one of the first ones by the nurse whose name I can't remember. Uh,
Dora Kin DK.
yes, yes. I have the book up there probably on my shelf. Um, there was just a number of things, and it was great because I knew massage. I trained in massage. I taught massage in like when they had adult classes in a high school or something. I would teach basic massage to couples and so on. But learning these techniques, which were so subtle and yet so powerful, really just enriched my work with people and helped them to do have something to go home with that they could do. Yeah.
Uh, I am looking up therapeutic touch. Um, it's rooted in the belief that practitioners can influence a person's energy field, promote healing. They assess and rebalance the energy flow. Um, but I don't see the person who founded it. So what about shamanic? How did you get trained in that, and what does that mean? That you go to middle world, upper world, lower middle, power animal? What are we doing with that?
I remember a woman named Marcy who had been trained in shamanic healing, and I was really at a low point in my health process, probably after one of my surgeries that I had in Minneapolis. And I remember so my introduction was with her. I remember laying on a couch, and she had a drum, and she did drumming as a way to kind of take the heart and the whole body into a place of traveling to another level, another place. Could be into many people use the tree. For example, you can imagine there's a door in a tree and you go under the tree into the roots, and some people go up into the top of the tree. The Four Winds Society, which I'm a member of now, they go to the top for kind of future information and down to your roots for some clearing, and different tribes or different sources of shamanic training have different places. But for me, to be able to rest after so much pain and just have her take me with these visions, these images to a place of healing, and then ask a question that I think instinctively she knew to ask. And I can remember crying or just feeling like I could be free to see that or release it. So it was just very, very safe. It was, and then of course bringing me back totally into the room instead of into that image, but coming back feeling pain-free sometimes, feeling that I was just part of the world again. I wasn't like trying to get away because of pain, or I wasn't trying to, just feeling lost, which I felt like I could never work again, for example. So several of those sessions, I mean, I did it repetition's the mother of education and of healing. So, uh, but it felt like a safe place where I could go with the person directing. It wasn't that somebody did it to me. And those are two different things, especially if you've been invaded by a surgical knife or some other of the mainstream modalities that are aimed at that approach. Let's put it that way.
Mm. I looked it up. Dolores Krieger and Dora Kuntz founded Therapeutic Touch. What,
Thank you.
to understand why you were in so much pain, is that when you had your reproductive organs removed in your 30s?
That was one of the times. Yes. I've had my gallbladder removed. I've had both ovaries that had been uh, somehow they weren't infected, but they were too large and causing a lot of pain. I had a broken ankle. I've just had a series series of things over the years. Um, Most recently, cancer. for the third time. And I'm trying to go back to your question about that.
So
But I
it
was in
was
so much pain.
physical pain and emotional pain, both maybe.
Sure, because emotionally I couldn't do my work, or sometimes I lost a job, or I didn't have the kind of the other thing is I have sensitivity to most pharmaceuticals because I was overdosed in those initial surgeries. And so I have to use alternative methods to deal with the pain or with the healing process. I don't know if that answers your question, but
Have you found herbs and that kind of physical substance, or you relied on um, energy healing and prayer and whatever?
no, luckily there were herbalists in many, actually in Minnesota, I was trained in, but then learned to use homeopathic remedies first. And those are wonderful and easy to take, and people used to make fun of them as like no med the no medicine because there's nothing physical in them. But there's a whole study, of course, about
Vibrational frequency.
right the frequency of each source. Yeah, and they worked. Now I'm using herbal a polypore mostly. It's a combination of mushrooms in a tincture from a local herbalist who actually goes out and gathers and cultivates and then creates the liquid uh, herbal combination. So I have that 3 times a day at just a tablespoon, and there's some others I've used too quite a bit.
You've had a lot of challenges. The being born to that, not having a biological father, being expelled from the convent after you were in love with Jesus and a nun, scarred lungs, medical menopause in your 30s, Lyme's disease, West Nile virus, cancer. Do you but you've said that in your book, Naked Seeds, that pain is a messenger and a avenue propellant for growth.
Yes, I've learned that can be. I think if I didn't somehow meet the right people to find the different ways people learn to heal, like the Feldenkrais or like the herbal concoctions and so on. The homeopathic saved me for a number of years, helped me a lot. I think that without that, without learning those modalities and then learning to do them myself or help others with them, I wouldn't be here. Uh, because I was so overdrugged and then overreactive to if someone tried to give me a Western medical drug again. It just didn't work for me or it caused more problems.
Hmm. Um, so is grief another word for depression? I mean, has that been dealing with all these struggles been depressing?
I can remember sharing with a lot of my clients who were depressed or were diagnosed as depressed, that it was important to play with that word a little bit and say, what's pressed down? What has been pressed down in your life? What have you pressed down rather than facing or working through or looking at and seeing if you could heal it in some way? So I think that across the board, first thing I would say is that's one thing I learned. Um, it was important to do that. Uh, and because, well, in my case, I wouldn't tolerate drugs for depression. So learning other techniques of how to look at the truth or find ways to move forward or whatever the situation was, doing simple exercises if every day if necessary. And
What kind of exercises? Because I'm thinking that people could learn and apply what you discovered.
I think what I was thinking of there was that because I learned things like the tapping technique just with my hands, or I learned things that were self-sufficient, or had a trusted shamanic leader to take me on journeys where I knew I was safe and I could come back, or something to get information um, that would help me basically either release the depression of the moment or go back to the time when some happening maybe caused. When I think of depression, I think what pressed down? What did I press down? My voice, definitely. I wasn't supposed to speak up. That was a pattern for me. A lot of people, that's true. Not because they were bad, but because they were supposed to obey their father, or they were supposed to um, always agree with the priest, or they're supposed to, whatever situation you're in, when you give your voice away, when you give your power away, even in small ways, over and over again, you forget and almost don't recognize it until you're depressed. You are pressed down, and it's not intentional, but it's a pattern in in probably all societies. But so it is. I found it important to turn that around in some way, and I was glad to have some teachers to help that, like the shamanic person and others. Uh, Acupuncture helped systemically to move fluids again, and Tai Chi moves the fluids again. And I find even now when I'm tired and feeling a little down about my cancer or something, best thing for me is to get out there and move because the body is made to move. Just like we're made to express, we're made to speak, we're made to share our ideas. We have a brain for that. But when we're suppressed, it becomes unhealthy. I spread that out a little bit too. I don't know if that answered your question, but
Yeah, it does. Well, but as a kind of an end note, a footnote, why do you think so many people, especially young people, especially girls, are anxious and depressed today, now? It hasn't gotten better, it's gotten worse.
well, I think one thing is that we still do not have equality uh, across the board in everything. Yes, we had a woman vice president. Yes, in America, whatever. There are changes in some political things in the world, but um, one of my experiences of being an administrator of a family planning clinic was to hear every story of every woman, whether it was to get birth control, to see a nurse, to have an abortion, whatever. Um, it was really clear that they did not feel they had rights over their own bodies. From the very starting point of, I don't have the right to say no to the man or the boy who's impregnating me, or to the church that says I cannot refuse my husband. Am I making sense there? So
Absolutely.
there's a lot of patterns in everyday life where women are just not empowered to say no, and not just in that area, but or to say what they want. And yes, it has changed some, but I think that's a overall kind of suffocating sort of film mask. I don't even know what to call it, but it's just there. I see more young girls being active and taking more roles that are at least equal to men in jobs and so on, and it's a good sign. Does that, I mean, and answer your question a little bit?
Yeah, I'm thinking too that that with the women's movement, girls are expected to achieve and they do better. They're more likely to go to college than boys nowadays. But they're also supposed to be attractive and thin or whatever the beauty standard is for the moment. So I think that puts a lot of pressure on someone to be a high achiever and popular and defer to males to be liked or whatever. That's a lot.
Hmm. Well, it is, and if the men are still the primary income owners as well, because they get the jobs at the higher pay, which is still the case pretty much across the board. Uh, that makes a difference too, because who's the provider for the family? So that gives them a power level that's very, very different to say what the family should do or whatever. And unless there's a real equality, which I think most couples, well, they have to get therapy to do that. Um, just because the society is supportive of that. I mean, in my what childhood, and Father Knows Best was the big show on television, or the one of the few television shows. And he was a nice man, and he was a doctor, and he was, but at home, she did everything and had it just right for him. That wasn't bad. He didn't beat her. He didn't. but it wasn't equal either. And I think that's still here, I'm
Yeah,
afraid.
right. We don't change that rapidly, I guess.
Hmm.
Um, what was you said that love and singing like love for Jesus, being the bride of Christ, that also helped you get through all the difficulties, physical and family. What was it like being the bride of Jesus?
Well, that personal relationship that I felt, um, I didn't have that. Well, I did have it kind of quietly before I went to the convent. Quietly in the sense that women never went into the sanctuary, for example, where the priest did what the priest did, for communion and so on. That was all male. It was the altar boys and the priest when I grew up. And but one summer when the nuns were away for a retreat, the sister who was in charge of all that, prepping for the priest before a mass, whatever, asked if I would do that. Would take care of the flowers, and I didn't get to touch the consecrated host, but I got to lay out the vestments and I put the chalice out, and all of that. And that day that I prepared that, I can remember the one first day I prepared that, I stood up there in the sanctuary and looked out at an empty church, but I raised my hands as if I was teaching and sharing like Jesus would have done. And that was kind of that was the beginning of it in a way, because it felt empowered. I was not just a woman in the church doing nice things and taking care of my husband to be or whatever. I was in high school, I guess, at that point. So it began kind of there. It wasn't a power thing as much as being able to share and be who I am. Not there was nothing wrong. My mother was an organist. She was up in there. That's a powerful place to be. Her piano playing was exquisite, and that's powerful. But for me, it wasn't my thing. And so being able to join a group of women whose mission, who was were in they were about teaching the principles of Christ to the world. It was a missionary community around the world. There was like 4,000 people, sisters still, and being taught about that and being allowed to be that close in prayer and in silence with someone that had good ethics, frankly. They've been twisted by a few people, but initially it was, and just recently, I want to add that I just went through a couple weeks, several weeks actually, of a class on Mary Magdalene, because Mary Magdalene, they have found, was not the prostitute and etc. in the Bible at all, but another apostle and one who wrote her own papyrus, which were found in Lourdes, where she had to escape. So I had the privilege of with a woman who has done this study online to go and learn about what she did, escaping to France, and how she did what Jesus taught her to do, and spread the word, so to speak. So that's, I don't know if that helps you, but when you asked the question, I liked it because I realized that I wouldn't have had maybe that calling in the same way if that sister that had put me in charge and I could be there. My One of my youngest nieces was the first, long time ago now, but was the first girl to be allowed to be an altar girl with the priest. So that was like 20 years later
Mm,
than when I left there.
mm. Um,
But my private time, that we were encouraged to have private time with God, with Jesus, and that really felt like an intimate personal relationship, um, energetically, and that I wasn't alone with that.
but it seems like the most common prayers, Hail Mary, Mother of God, are to Mary, not to Jesus. So it seems like Catholics pray to Mary more. I guess she's the intercessor to Jesus and God. That's how it goes?
I think that's true. People feel more comfortable. Well, I can't speak for everybody. Jesus, for some people, Jesus is as, in certain denominations, that is who they pray to more. It's not about Mary at all. There are some churches that Mary was the mother, but not a saint, not a specific.
Yeah,
Um,
Protestants
mhm.
don't
Well,
think. talk about her very much
Not the
in
same. Yeah, not the
Catholics too.
same. Yeah, she was part of an important part of the story. But here was this young woman with an unusual pregnancy. And that's one of my little stories in the book is, she and her cousin Elizabeth both had unusual pregnancies. And they might have come to my clinic where I was working and asked for help. Luckily, they had people to safely bring those babies to life, and also people supporting the fact that that was a little bit odd, but we'll take you in anyway. We'll keep you as part of the family. That's not always the case today.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Um, when Catholics talk about Holy Ghost, I don't have a sense of what that is, the part of the Triune God. Can you tell us what the Holy Ghost is?
Oh, well, I'm sure that any Catholic priest, whatever, except maybe the new Pope, would not want me to be asked about that, but or maybe they'd be okay. I think that I'm not sure why the church historically decided to divide into Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. Holy Spirit is my preference, and I was part of the convent of the Holy Spirit, of the Sisters of the Holy Spirit, missionary sisters. Um, Maybe, one of the ways when you asked the question, I was making notes about this meeting with you. I thought about how it's a symbol of a family, sort of, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Okay, it's like it's not just one person, but it gives different people a chance maybe to feel that they can communicate with a different part of God, a different part of the divine, however you want to think about that. Um, and Lutherans do the Holy Spirit. We just had Pentecost in the Lutheran church here. It's not just a Catholic thing. Uh, but I think that people, if there was just one God with one identity, like this is who God is, that wouldn't serve as many people. And that reminds me to go back to my very favorite and most memorable first question. I was not did not go to Catholic church because my father wasn't Catholic when I was a child. So I
Your
went to
stepfather.
my stepfather, but I went to Saturday classes for those who weren't fully Catholic. We had somebody who wasn't in the flock, so to speak. But we went to classes and a nun taught us. And the first thing we learned is from the Baltimore Catechism. And the first question was, where's God? And the answer is, God is everywhere. And I will always remember that more than anything else I learned. And I thought, well, if that's true, then why are we treating these people this way? Or why are we saying those people are sinners? Or why are we saying that because you're not Catholic, there's something wrong with you? Right away, I'm asking questions. But I silenced those for a while. But the inclusivity that I learned later on, even in the convent, because we were trained to go, to different missions, different countries with their whole lives were different, their religions were different. And there was something there about converting them, but for the most part, it was about serving them as nurses or teachers or, um, in that way. So there were
So
some that were into conversion, but not my.
what, you were in there 4 years?
Yes, just 4 years.
And what were you intending to to do? Teach, nurse, where?
I think I would have been a teacher. Yeah, definitely. We got to try, it was sort of in the training process as a novice. I was in the convent, the order had a hospital in northwest of Chicago. So those of us who were interested, we got to go and kind of be there for a month or so and see what that was really like. And I was on a orthopedic floor, kind of long-term patients, and it was really insightful. And but I knew that wasn't my calling, but I really loved that one-on-one working with them and learning how to work in that situation. Also, there was a school I worked just one month or two tried working with sorry, not 4-year-olds, fourth graders in terms of teaching catechism, teaching about the religion and so on. So they gave us, and then I also we had a home for the aged for not just for nuns, but I mean for everybody that was just up the road from our convent. So being there with people who were in a nursing home as well, we got those chances to train, at least in those places. And we were also transported to college in Chicago, depending on what we wanted to learn and what they thought, how we could best serve in missions.
And why did you leave?
I was asked to leave. I was told to leave
Because
because they falsely accused me of doing something. I didn't even know what it was. One morning I was called into the office of the new superior, who I hadn't actually met, and she basically, it was a tiny little room. She basically just said, "Have a seat," and then she said, "The provincial council has decided you must leave the community." And I just said, "What?" And she stood up. She went around to a filing cabinet and pulled some things out of the filing cabinet and put them out in front of me. Provincial council, there's a car waiting to take you in 20 minutes from here to St. Anne's, and you need to sign your release from vows, or we will have you released from vows. One, two, three. I was so shocked because I had just had several months of amazing experiences with, the singing, the music, the church, the community itself had changed quite a bit, where there had always been, at the direction, by the way, of the Mother Superior from Rome. Many places were changing at that time in the 70s, but apparently it was too fast for some people. And so someone thought they had seen me lying with a priest in the retreats. There were retreats in the same buildings there for teenagers in the nearby places around Chicago there. And they would go in to pray and maybe lay down together. Anyway, I was accused of sleeping with the priest there. And I just said, what? You know, totally anyway, so that's how I left in a car. Um, they had some trouble getting the paperwork done, so I was down at the home for the aged in a private room with bars on the windows, which was for the safety of the people living there. But nevertheless, the phone was tapped. I couldn't use a phone. I couldn't write to anybody. I had no idea what had happened. And finally, they let one of my classmates come down to see me. I got some idea, but she brought some little note cards with envelopes and stamps. And so I got to write and send out to the different mission sites where sisters that I knew. I wanted them to know that I'd been asked to leave and that I really appreciated them. So I at least got those through. But even anyway, the two top superiors drove me to the airport a few days later and made sure I got on the plane, in the seat of the plane.
do
Yeah.
you think that it was because they thought you had a strong personality and would be thinking for yourself, or that you were young, or do you think they really believed that you had sex with a priest or lying?
This woman was new as a provincial, the head of the province of the Chicago, the area. Um, all I know, her job was to interview each person in the convent, and there were quite a few of us there usually, probably at that time, maybe 100, maybe more. I thought she was going to interview me, just get to know me, like I was happy to see her. All I know is that someone who was suspect, I think there was some suspicion among the older sisters of having young people like teenagers in the building, or having that they were worried about losing, who knows why. It may have been one person, it may have been a couple of people who felt that somehow I was involved. But the other thing is, I think it has to do with the fact that I was the guitarist for the community. The music changed from organ mostly to guitar in the 70s. And that put me in a place of joy, but to some people, a place like the organist and the choir director often were not asked to plan the celebration of those who came home from the missions to celebrate their jubilee of 20 years or 30 years, and they wanted a special event. Usually it was the organ and the choir. They wanted this new guitar music. And of course, just being totally innocent, just thought, well, cool. But I would say, well, why don't you include some organ? No, 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 we want this. Afterwards, I realized that could have been
Yeah.
a frightening thing to some. It was not intentional. I was not in any way a powerful figure. I just played the guitar, but music is powerful.
And I think in your book you said they didn't want people to stand out or have a strong personality or any ego. You were supposed to kind of keep everything low key. How would you describe that?
I think the more traditional training, it's not there. I don't think there's very many places. I don't really know. I haven't done a check all around, but it used to be part of the main training of a nun. You're working for God, and you go in and you're humble and you teach, or you nurse the people. You pray for people, but you don't take over. And I wasn't taking over. I was just singing, but the music did to some of them. I can see that could have been the reason.
Yeah.
Uh, it was a changing time, and not, a lot of the older sisters were afraid the change was going to maybe leave them out. I think that most of the elders who were there was a retired wing of the convent, and most of them loved my music. So I don't think it was as a group, but I think there were individuals, maybe more of the superiors were afraid things were out of hand. So we got these teenagers coming in for not right into the convent, but coming to the building with for retreats, and we have other people, brothers and priests coming in, and there, frankly, there were a couple of priests and brothers who were out of line with their um, attempts to get close to a sister. Let's put it that way. So
Um,
these are real stories, folks.
yes, that's true. So
Excuse me.
later on, you talked about guides and healing spirits that you used in your healing work that probably Catholics wouldn't talk about in the same way. So, how did your understanding of spirit helping you change?
I think that, excuse me, even in the older times, but not long before I joined, sorry, the mission was to help people with their needs wherever you traveled, like in this community, which was missionary, but not to, um, but tried to also get them to join the church because there was the one holy true church. That was the Catholic model. Possibly other models too, other Protestant that I don't know about. But by studying about the Native American religions, living on a Native American reservation, living with the Amish as my friends in Indiana, after this was after the convent, of course, a lot of different things. Working in a bookstore where there were a variety of different traditions, and especially just that my degree was in folklore and religious studies, Islam and Buddhism, and a lot of the religious differences. But finding the common ground was something that I found very joyful in the studies. So so I think that I was opened up to just see people are people, and what are the commonalities, and excuse me. Um, so spirit clearly was celebrated in all of these other people I met. This is not just one. I didn't have a problem with that. And maybe in some ways, I think maybe that shift was slightly there with all of us in the convent, the younger people, that we were more open to finding common ground than trying to convert people. Not that we had a chance of doing that much in Chicago, but it was more like if we were going to the missions and we were more open to a tradition that was there, like we had sisters in Africa, in Ghana, and so on for many years. So that is that an answer to your question? I think it's
Yeah.
mhm.
What about in your so your healing practice has been directed through massage mainly, would you say?
It started that way, but I would say that it became more hands-on or hands-off. Some people were not safe being touched. Using voice to guide people to an area that was hurting or to listen to the energy that our hands give out, especially if we're paying attention or allowing it to flow. You don't have to touch someone. Like right now, I can feel it going out to you to this screen. And so some people were too afraid of touch even. But it's about inviting them to have a safe place, either with hands or hands off, hands on, voice, music, where they feel safe, like I did with my first shamanic journeys, to go where they need to go to find what they need for healing, not what I think they know. And I listen enough that if I hear them say something or I feel if I sense something, I say, well, what about this? I ask a question. That's another way if you help heal. And then they have the answer. So it really is, what's the name of the Italian, the not Freud, not who are the three big psychiatrists? Freud, Jung,
Jung,
and the third one is the one that I took. I think I put that in my book. He had a certain technique um, that
Gestalt?
helped. Hmm?
Gestalt? No.
No, um, it was a. I'm sorry that I wasn't prepped for this, but looking that far back, but it's about asking the person questions in a sequence that helps them look at body, mind, and spirit, their own, not what you think or see or therapize, whatever. So that to me, that was has always been the most powerful healing experiences is just to be there to guide and make it safe for others to find their way. I think I put it that way.
And are you or have been aware of your guides and their guides involved in the process?
Uh, I guess um, I don't usually, mine are kind of with me. And sometimes, I don't know, sometimes I might call for help, but generally speaking, I feel like I'm pretty much at one with that. And it's more like I listen. And if something grabs me that somebody says, I might ask a question. And I'll say, oh, yeah, you said something about that. And then they go on. And it isn't the same as psychotherapy or just sitting with a psych, but it's kind of like that, except that I feel it in their bodies too, either energetically or hands-on. And that's what draws me to say, oh, what's this? Or what are you feeling here? But it was always, somehow I learned it was always they're in control. It's not for me to heal them. I'm here to be present, to encourage, to listen, to see how I can help their own journey. So,
And that ties in with what you said about depression being repressing feelings and desires and whatever. So asking questions allows those repressed feelings to come to the surface to be
yes.
dealt with. Yeah.
Hmm.
Um, so that sounds so interesting to be on the Cheyenne reservation. And I know that was a time when when they were repressed. They couldn't follow their traditional rituals and dances and
Yes,
ceremonies.
that's right.
So what 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 did you see when you were on the Cheyenne reservation?
Mm. Well, it's a big question. First of all, that we were not welcome. Uh, there were five of us that went to the north first. We ended up at the Cheyenne Reservation in Montana.
You were
The,
college students.
yes, I'm sorry. As part of Dr. Oh, how could I forget his name? Um, he and his wife had lived with Black Elk during their honeymoon when he was studying he was asked by this chief to write down the sacred pipe ritual because he was afraid that it would be lost. There was no one practicing it. So he asked this professor that we happened to have,
Mm,
to
mm.
please write it down. So he and his wife on honeymoon were living with the chief. But that was the Oglala Sioux. That was the sacred pipe ritual. Anyway, so I took a class with him about American Indian religions, and at the end, I wanted to know how to learn more, so I went to his office on the last day, and I had received a grant from Honor Society to study the Amish, and some things about the Amish. And so, just as a sort of a background, so I asked, well, what could I do to learn more about the Native Americans? What do you have book recommendations or where could I? He said, no, there's nothing.
Hmm.
But he said, you know, I have one position left on the group going out to live on the reservations. Would you like to do that? Yes. I said, yes. I said, yes, but I have this honors grant for something else. He said, I'll take care of that if you really want to go. I said, yes, period. You know, I had to, of course, tell my folks and get things together. But within the week, had to be back there to leave. 7 of us packed into a Volks a no, it's not a Volkswagen. They're called a station wagon, the old station wagon. So we all went out to the Northern Cheyenne Reservation, but because we couldn't drop one woman off who was supposed to be at this is a long time the Ogallala Sioux the trading post there, but it was too volatile. There'd been a lot of uprising um, that was dangerous for non-natives to be there. So she came with us and then decided to go down south. Anyway, the long story of that is we all stayed sort of overnight without any sleeping bags or anything in this one house. And one guy went to learn about photography, one young man. Another woman decided she wanted to go south to the southwest. And the others just they decided to go elsewhere. You know, that's where they wanted to go for a particular tribe. I stayed there and I spent most of my time with a young 9-year-old girl who lived in a cabin up the hill. And she walked with me around the hills and taught me things about the people and just was my sort of adopted guide. But they saw me with her and then trusted me enough to invite me to help. Like one woman invited me to help prepare a meal after her grieving. The tradition was to offer a celebration. And so she prepared this meal for the tribe at the powwow. And I got to help with that. And it's called the giveaway. And literally almost everything in her house, small house, but everything had to be given away. And then what happened is that after the celebration, people would start to bring something else. It wasn't the stuff she had, but she had what she needed in her home. It was a really wonderful, simple but wonderful experience to see how they helped each other through her grief and healing.
Hmm.
And I got to experience 3 powwows there, which were only allowed on the 4th of July or Memorial Day because that was a federal thing, not a native thing. They weren't allowed to practice their religion in any way, shape, or form. The giveaway was maybe one of the closest things for the women. And I wanted to learn the flute, um, and I did talk to the flute maker there. The government would not allow them to go and find cedar anymore, which the flutes used to be made of. And so, because they were building them small little huts to live in out of plain old is it 2x4s? You know, the typical kind of lumber that we've seen. He actually carved the flute for me out of one of those pieces of wood. I still have it here,
Can you
actually.
reach it?
Yes.
We'll enjoy your photographs of the flowers. Very vibrant.
Might be kind of dusty, but he was 85, so he just didn't have, see, there we go.
Can you play it or no? Is that asking too much?
I'll try. We'll see if it still works.
Okay.
I don't know if you can see, I'm trying to tilt it with the zoom here. You see he has the figure of an animal up here. Up here it is. Sorry, I had it backwards. Uh, and that would have been a much more ornate carving. And you'll see it on the modern, you can see better flutes now that they're allowed to make them. And then right here is the morning star sign. They were the morning star people. The Northern Cheyennes were called the Northern Star people. And let's see. I don't know. It's been a while.
Yeah.
The two, I, one was the wolf call, and then there was another one, but I don't remember the sequence exactly. It's just, it's a call. It's not like a song. Although the real ones would have also played a love song to, someone they were courting. That is not the traditional call, but it's how they would do that for like the wolf or and he put some feathers on the end here too with leather. But that's all he had to make it from is this piece of what, 2x4 or whatever they called it. They made the cheap houses of there.
Wow. Quite
Yeah.
a treat to have that.
His name was Grover Wolfvoice. That's his name.
Hmm. And then you also spent time with the Amish. Do like the Mennonites in the area here, they segregate the women and the men, and teenagers don't date. They're kind of marriages are kind of arranged, maybe initiated by the boy. Was it that separation of gender that you saw with the Amish as well, or not?
In a way, in a way. But so yes, I would say that generally, but like I was at this place called Honeyville, and it just was two dirt roads, and they had a store where there was a man who kept supplies and things there for them because they didn't use electricity, so they had oil lamps and that kind of thing in their home. And at that corner was a house. So at this corner was the store, and down this way was where Amos and Bertha, and then the mommy grandma also was there, Lydia. She was 90 something. So the couple lived there, and Bertha, she actually ran kind of like a quilt business, if you will, unofficially. But she would take orders for quilts and then she'd have people make them. She actually had a buyer out in Connecticut because the Amish quilts can be very beautiful and different designs are specifically by them. Anyway, so they lived in this house and then a mummy house, the little tiny house, which just had two rockers and a stove and a tiny little bathroom and a little bed. And sometimes I'd sit with mommy in the rockers, and it's so quiet there. You can't hear anything outside, inside. It's just so quiet. There's no machinery. He actually cut boards of wood as part of his work, but not with electricity. They used oil, I think, some kind of oil run. I never went over to see him, but Amos was the head of that, and he did his thing across the street, and he lived with Bertha. Then across the street, across the road, dirt road, um, I forget who lived down there because I never met them. They live very kind of privately, but they get together. They actually stack their chairs on a wagon that's, pulled by a horse and go from house to house on Sundays for services. So they just take the chairs off and have their service if it's not raining outside. Um, and then, so I mostly was on that corner, except when I picked the three sisters up, because at the other corner over here, that was Mommy Annie. And she did wove rag rugs, of which I still have some. But that's how I met them, is that for my final paper in folklore at Indiana University, I decided to do it on the rag rug weaving of the Amish people. So I went to study, and she was tiny. She was about this high on me, but she had this huge loom. The pieces of wood were about that square, that thick, like old logs almost. But she was up there almost crawling on top doing all this. It was quite amazing. So I studied that. I learned about the quilts. I learned about I actually they invited me several times for a meal with just a small family. And like I said, sometimes mommy and I would sit, just the two of us in the rocking chair, and we'd be rocking, and then I'd snore a little bit, and then she'd be snoring because it was so quiet. But one of the reason I kind of also met them was that they liked to go on the weekends to, what did they call it? There's a name, it'll come to me. But it was the Shipshawana, where they had this big, kind of like a fair. It was not a fair like a, Ferris wheel kind of fair, but where there were things of exchange and uh, the kids doing like a what are the 4-H fair kind of thing. But they had other things to buy and and kind of exchange, and it wasn't just Amish. So I found this thing, which I don't have. I'm probably lucky. It was a chunk of rough wood, kind of like a pot that you put flowers in, except or like a plant, except that it was this wood and it was very rough on all sides, and it was about this high, like this, heavy, and it had a handle, and the handle was probably this big, stuck in the top. And I thought, what is this for, right? So I go to Mommy Annie and I say, Mommy, what's this for? And she says, oh, I don't know. She says, go ask Mommy Lydia. And I asked because she's older, she was 98. So Mommy Lydia didn't know either, but she said, come. So I followed her up to this group of a circle of Amish men. And Mommy she just kind of bowed a little bit and looked at the leader. She knew who the leader was. And she said, she kind of pushed me forward. She said, was ist es? Was ist es? I think something like that. It's kind of a German. I'm sure I ruined it for but exactly. Um, so he looked at it, and this was like maybe 10 men, black hats, black outfits, right? Hmm. Handed it to the next one, handed it to the next one, handed it to the next one. All 10 of these men, looking at it. Back to Levi at the top. He hands it to me and he says, sauerkraut masher.
Who would know that? That's
No,
amazing.
but the it was like a theater scene. It was like something wonderful. It's how they do things, and they figured it out together, and it was wonderful. I kept that a long time,
Mm,
not
mm,
because I mashed any sauerkraut.
mm. Um, so you went from being in a convent to managing a women's clinic to being a healer, and then somewhere along the way, around 30, you discovered that you liked women more than men romantically. How did that evolve?
Well, there's a shift. Let's see. I went to a music at Indiana University, not when I was there as a student, but I was living in where was I living? I can't. It was either Indiana or I wasn't in Minnesota yet. I went to a women's music concert at Indiana University. I was at my Uncle John's, where my mother took me when I was a baby. I was just outside of Indiana University area, and I just thought, wow, okay, this is where I belong. Just hearing the music and being around the energy, the kind of empowerment of the songs and women. And I met someone there who was a producer, young woman producer of music, or she was trying to build a business that way. She invited me up to Minnesota, and all these wonderful women involved in music there, and I was still playing guitar. You know, that's pretty much it. It was kind of that, it just, the energy was right of being part of a women's community. And I moved into a household where, kind of a common house, where there were one woman owned it, and then there were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bedrooms. And so we just, cooked in a common kitchen. And this was not, I was not in a relationship with any of them. This was just the women's community of Minneapolis. So that's kind of how it started, really. And
This is Meg Christian and Holly Near, those kind
yes, they were there. Yeah, they were there performing. And yes. Hmm.
of. So you've speaking about women, you mention in the book the divine feminine. What does that mean? Since we're talking about gender in a way.
Well, I think, first of all, not that I've studied lots of religions, but I did study religions of the Eastern, Eastern and not besides Islam, just a lot of different, even what do I want to say, not prehistoric, but goddess cultures that studied or had goddesses as part of the Rome did it, but a lot of other people did
It
too.
was prehistoric, the
It was,
like the Venus
yes,
figurines, the fertility figures.
yes, thank you. It was prehistoric. And so that's always been there. But then this patriarchy took over, and I don't remember the exact history, whether it was Rome or Egypt, that, those two were involved at one point. And but there were a lot of in Egypt, there's a lot of women goddesses, a lot of
Oh
women
yeah,
statues,
Isis and Nut and
Isis, yes, and it was pre-Catholic Christian, whatever. It's even in the Jewish tradition, not as much as goddesses, but mother figures who are powerful.
or I
Miriam,
think Shekinah, this is a female
Shekinah,
energy
right?
force.
Shekinah. I've been blessed to be welcomed by the Jewish community here as well as some Christian communities, and it's been good to learn some of this a little more, and how they're woven in, and how women are generally more revered because of that. On Saturday nights, some of us gather in our homes separately, and on Zoom, we have this Havdalah closing of the Sabbath ceremony. I just did that yesterday, and there is a prayer for Miriam in there, for example, Miriam, Moses' sister. So the women are honored in their way. It's not that. So yes, there's been a lot of sources, I guess, of seeing different ways women were treated throughout history.
It's interesting. It's not mainstream Judaism, but there's a story of Lilith, who was
Hmm.
Adam's first wife, who said, "I'm not going to be, subordinate to you," and left.
Hmm. Yes.
Lilith.
And a lot of those stories were probably just dropped when it was, for whatever reason, men felt it necessary to be in power. I think that's happened around all religions I've ever studied. And that was one of my degree was in religious studies and folklore, so it was a nice mix to see some of that.
Yeah. But maybe it's strongest in Hinduism and Buddhism, the goddesses.
Hmm,
You
yeah.
go to India, there's Lakshmi and Saraswati, or in the
Yeah.
taxi cars, they're everywhere. They're
Right.
temples to them.
Hmm.
Yeah. So they're not repressed. Um, okay. If we talk about Mother Nature, making this coherent in some ways, you were involved in a program where you could sense earthquakes and volcanoes before they happen. How did that work?
Um, there apparently there was among geologists, there were many of them, most of them had seen and confirmed that animals like goats or other four-legged would try to like climb a wall or do something unusual before an earthquake happened. A lot of people noticed that on the farms or around the world. Okay. And so this was in 1980, I think, when I became part of that. But another massage person that I would trade healing with, she was also a kind of broader healer as I was. Uh, she told me about this program called Project Migraine, where some of the geologists or other scientists, they believed that yes, humans could predict earthquakes as well. Now you can imagine why it might be helpful for humans to have somebody predicting earthquakes because you want to get out of the way or
Yeah.
you want to know if your house is going to be destroyed. And so some believe that, but they mostly just believed animals. Yeah, animals do that, but we can't rely on humans. This one guy in Washington, D.C., decided to do a study. So he he reached out across the country for any of us who were having migraines because he had this hunch or this not whatever, maybe knowledge collected from somewhere. I didn't really study his history. So I became part of that, as did my friend Jila, and we would report every time we had a migraine headache. And it wasn't always migraines that were the trigger, but that mostly for us it was. So we did that for several years, and he gathered the data, and indeed it was true that humans could be predictors of earthquakes. Um, so that's where I learned about it. And I can still, I don't keep track of it in the same way that I did then. But when you start to see patterns of human behavior or see what's in the news, and then I've changed my focus to be on the sun itself. There's a thing you can put on your phone, and it shows the explosions on the sun. The sun does that to
The
keep it
solar
from healing.
flares.
Solar flares, right? Solar flares, and they part of that is I'm sure the sun is keeping itself cool, but I haven't studied that except to know that that's what triggers earthquakes and volcanoes. And the reason there's been an intense, you can find it just about anywhere online, intense increase in solar flare activity. And you can even see the spots by number because the scientists have them numbered. And what that does is it heats up the earth. And we see a lot of human beings being heated up by something more powerful than ourselves these days. Let's put it that way. But not just humans, lots of strange behavior in the animals and so on. And what happens there is that because the earth gets too hot at its core from the sun, the volcanoes that have been quiet for years, their purpose is to cool the earth because they're coming from down deep in the center of the earth. So they're starting to explode on the earth because they're trying to cool the earth. So that's what I know. It's a scientific fact, and I was part of the project for a number of years, and I just kind of know now. It's not that I don't have to have a migraine. It's just kind of knowing what's happening. And mostly I look at my phone. How's that for modern? And look at what the solar flares are doing.
And how do you feel when there's an intense outburst from the sun?
Me personally, I feel anxious, I think, more it's like an anxiety or restless or like um, like there's too much fluid in my body kind of feeling, like that kind of feeling. It's not that I've gotten used to it, so I just kind of say, "Oh yeah, it must be a solar flare," and I look it up on the phone. But when I look at politics, I say, "Aha, I wonder what the solar flares were doing today." So it's one way to follow human behavior on Earth because
Do you
it's not.
like yesterday, Trump bombed the three Iranian nuclear sites? I wonder what was going. Do you have any idea if there was a solar flare burst yesterday?
Oh, there is every day, and I think that they'll build up, but there's some that have never been seen to be that intense or that hot or that frequent, according to scientists watching them over the years. And that's what we're having is this consistent, like more of them, more intense solar flares. I think it's just building up anybody that's in the business of trying to stir people up or make war or do whatever. It's just part of the energy. We're part of it. We think we're separate and we're not. We're tiny little creatures with this planet exploding. I shouldn't say the planet, the sun is exploding to stay cool. And we're getting too hot everywhere. I mean, if you start to look at nature and like in the rainforests and other places around the earth that are being changing just drastically, not because of human activity.
Hmm.
I mean, human activity follows from this, but
The Heart Math Institute in Northern California, the way they think we connect to the Earth is through the electromagnetic field, the Schumann and they feel we affect it. and it affects
Sure.
us. So, and then the solar flares probably affect that electromagnetic field.
Oh,
So,
yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
so we're all connected. Um, Last question is, now that you're dealing with cancer for the third time, what do you find is most helpful to you in your healing?
Wow. I didn't expect that one. Well, it's been helpful to I think one of the things I need to remember is that part of how I feel every day, not because of the cancer per se, but about the cancer, is that my mother died of cancer. And yesterday or the day before, I realized there was a piece of my connection with her and that because my mother wasn't physically close to me because she, of course, had been taken away from me in a sense as a child. So even as an adult, and when she was almost had, she died several days after she told me this, she reached over and touched me, which was very rare, and um, said that she was didn't know why she just didn't never felt as close. Well, I knew, but I wasn't going to tell her at this stage. So she died several days later. And the other day, when I was really upset about this current diagnosis, which does push me closer to death than I had hoped, it probably will. Um, just that I need to let that go, let her totally. I didn't know I still had something hanging. I forgave. It wasn't a forgiveness thing. It was more like I wanted to be close to her. Well, part of being close to her would, on a perhaps subconscious level, probably had to do with her pain and her suffering. And I noticed that in my clients too. We carry the pain and suffering of other people if we're not careful or if we sometimes choose it. That's what comes to me to share now. So yesterday I realized that and I tried and I let go again of that in a new way. And I'm trying to just be present to each day and what I'm needing to face today. Uh, and a friend, friend of mine, tomorrow I have to learn about it's apparently spreading to my brain a little bit, trying to. So I have to learn about whether radiation is going to stop that a bit. I'm going to be 76, so there's this question, what do I want to do? Because I have tried so hard for so many years to stay as natural with my approaches to healing because of disappropriation of treatments in the past. And now I need to rely on things that I normally wouldn't choose just to buy some time. So I'm grateful for friends who are supportive and loving, and some of them who know about the cancer journey, like one I called today who was a pharmacist but had lived through cancer. And she gave me the courage to choose to go ahead and learn about this radiation and taught me because she'd been a pharmacist too that my particular can that this I have to risk this because it's the only thing that will heal that area. It's the only thing they have. So it's learning and trying to be open to new things and at the same time every day doing what is nourishing to me, whatever that is at this point. And all the things I've learned in trying to help other people, I guess, is being present to my process with as much love as I can. Yeah.
Is there anything else that people should know about your book? How, if they want to read Naked Seed, One Woman Unearths What Was Silenced, how would they get a hold of that book? It's on Amazon, I know.
Yes, I don't know. You can't see it probably on here. It's at Amazon.com, Kindle Plus. Well, you don't need to know that so much if you're ordering the book, just Amazon. But they do have it in Kindle format as well for those who prefer.
What's your website?
www.mecreator.com. And I would welcome people's comments or questions. And there's a couple of podcasts on there, but this one, this is an amazing time. Thank you for this.
Mm, thank you. It was wonderful.
you asked me to go deep and all around, and we
Yeah,
did.
that's what we did.